Assignment is a term that you're going to hear in C++ and you're going to read about, and when you look at it, it looks very simple. And we're talking really about the equal sign. And the prospect of assignment in C++ means setting or assigning, hence the word assignment, the value of something to something else. Now, while this looks very simple, we're talking about something like we have a integer type variable x and we want to set it equal to 3. Well, this is an assignment. Now, like everything else in C++, this is very simple on the surface, but it can lead us into some more complex situations, which we will touch on a little bit later on in the course. But for now, I want to lay the very foundational basics for assignment so that you have this correct in your brain, all right? So very simply put, this is simply taking the value 3 and assigning it to the variable x, right? So this is an assignment. We would call it, setting a variable value, setting x equal to 3, whatever. We seldom use the word assignment, but it's really what we're doing. Now here's something you need to remember. Make sure you burn this into your brain. Assignment simply copies the state of two existing objects. All right, so we're going to make a copy of the state of one object, which is, in this instance, our number 3, or our integer 3, and we're going to copy the state of that, or the value 3, into this integer object called x, or this integer variable, I should say, called x. Now, when we say x equals 3, keep in mind that there's two distinct sides of this, all right? And if you can keep this right here in your brain, it'll help you tremendously later on in all aspects of C++. The source is what's on the right side of the assignment, and the destination is what's on the left side. All right, so the 3 is our source here, and its destination, we want to copy it into x. All right, now that carries throughout anything that you use assignments in C++ on. All right, it will even work in this example here. Notice we're going to say 3 is going to be assigned to y, and then y, or 3, is going to be assigned to x. So in each situation, the rightmost gets assigned to the left, gets assigned to the left. All right, and then these are our assignments right here with the equal signs. Okay, so assignment is a very simple concept, but it can have some pretty involved implications for you a little bit later on when we're talking about some other things, which we will get to later. Don't want to confuse you now, but for now, just get this part in your head. Assignment is generally using that equal sign. Keep in mind the right side's the source, the left side is the destination, and we are simply copying the state of two existing objects. The ability to use increment and decrement operators is a really neat trick in C++, and you're seeing these in a lot of the other C-type languages now. But I want to go through them here in a two-part video. So here in part 1, we're just going to kind of talk about it just a little bit, kind of get you a mental image, and then in part 2, I actually want to do a very simple example and show you kind of a gotcha on using these things. Now, once you get used to using these things, they're totally addictive, and you're going to love it. But these things will bite you from time to time, and you have to make sure that you understand what's really going on with them to be able to use them effectively. And so that's what we're going to cover in these two videos. First of all, let's start off. We're going to use these to increment or decrement a value in a variable. Now, there's lots of times you need to do this. When you're doing for next counters or anything like that, any kind of looping construct, you may want to simply increase the value of a variable by 1. All right? This is a great shortcut because it saves you a lot of code, but it's very simple, like most things in C++ are. Notice the little smiley face. All right, they start off very simple, but then kind of back there in the background, there's a couple of gotchas that seem to pop up and steal half an afternoon from you from time to time. Okay, so here's the situation. We've got the variable total, and we want to increment total by 1. So we're going to set total equal to whatever is in total plus 1. So the first time over this, total would be 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. It goes into total. Now total is equal to 1. The second time over, total is equal to 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. That goes into total. Total's now worth 2. All right, very simple concept. But we don't want to write total equals total plus 1 every time, so we can simply write total plus equals 1. That does the very same thing in our code. All right. Then there's an even shorter way to get there, and that is to do plus plus total. Now, notice something that just happened kind of interesting here, and this is what will burn you later on. We'll look at it in the example. Total plus equals 1. Notice everything's on the right side. Here, total plus 1. Everything's on the right side of the variable. But when I did it this way, notice my plus plus went on the left side. And this can be huge because if I put it on the right, it totally changes the way this works. So increment and decrement operators can be used in two ways. And this is what you really need to understand about these. First of all, you can use them as a prefix type property. And this is exactly the examples that I showed you in the previous slide. Plus plus total. All right. And that is going to increment the value before the variable is used in that particular expression. Then we can do a postfix increment and decrement, and this increments the value after the variable is used. Now, you can kind of say, yeah, okay, I got that, and you know, you can feel pretty comfortable about it, but until you see it in code, you really can't grasp what this is going to do to your code. So in part 2 of this video, we're going to jump out into Visual Studio and look at a very simple example on using prefix and postfix increment and decrement operators. And this is a good example of what you should do with all of these things. We're going to do very, very simple basic examples here to help you really burn it into your brain what's going on here in the background in C++. So join me in part 2. We'll jump into Visual C++ and write some code. Welcome to part 2 of increment and decrement operators. And in part 2, we're just going to continue our discussion on using increment and decrement operators by jumping out into Visual C++ 2010 Express and actually build a very simple project. I've opened Visual C++ 2010 Express or 2010 Express, and I'm going to tell it to give me a new project. It's going to be a Win32 console application, and I will give it the name Increment Decrement Example. Then I will click OK, and then the little application wizard is going to come up. I'll just choose Next here. I'll tell it to give me an empty project and click Finish. Now, this thing is going to shuck and jive and gyrate, and that's a Southern technical term for configure the application. All right. Well, if I go out into Solution Explorer, and by the way, yours could be over here on this side, just mouse over it and click, you will see that there's my project name. And if I come down here to Source Files and right click and choose Add, I'll add a new item. And now I need my C++ module or file, if you will. Notice the .cpp extension. And in that, I will just call this one incdec and click Add. That will put it out there and then give me a coding environment or a module to actually write my code in. So what I'm going to do here is put the include statement for IOStream, and this will let me actually write data out to the command window, the console, if you will. And then I will create my int main, my main function, which is where your C++ programs are going to begin execution. Then I'll just give myself some room down here and tell it to return 0. Okay, let's do just a very simple example, and I want to show you how this especially we'll concentrate on increment here. Decrement will work just the same way. Okay, I'm going to create an integer called a and initialize it to be equal to 0, and then I'll create one called b and initialize it to 0. So now I have two variables, a and b, and they're both initialized with a value of 0. Now I'm going to set b equal to plus plus a. Now we know from the previous video, part 1, that that means a plus 1. Okay, and this is a prefix, so it's going to add 1 to a and assign it to b before it does the entire operation. Okay, and so then what I'm going to do is come down here and we're just going to do a standard cout. This will write something out to the console, And we'll give ourselves a note here, a equals, and then we'll just put our variable a, and then let me put the right symbols in there. We'll call the standard namespace again and do an end line. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing again. Let's do it the same spacing so it's a little easier on the I, and we'll put B. Did the same error again. You'll notice you do that a lot. And typing and talking is tough, let me tell you. Okay, so there's our example. Now to actually run this and build it, we'll come up here and choose to actually run this and debug, and it'll ask me if I want to build it, and I say yes. And if I didn't fat finger anything or offend the compiler, we should compile up just fine. That little flash there, it actually ran, but you couldn't see it in the window. Now the way we're going to run this is we're going to jump out to our libraries here, and I'm going to double click on Documents, and notice I see Visual Studio 2010. Now you have to find this folder. If you take the defaults when you install the Visual C++, this is where it will go. Open that up, go to Projects, and somewhere in there you will see Increment, Decrement, Example. Just open that, and I want you to notice that the executable file that I need is actually in the debug folder right inside that project. So this is what I want to run, so I'm going to back out. And since I am in Windows 7, there's a neat shortcut. I can just hold down my Shift key, right click on the debug folder, and say Open Command Window here, and it opens a command window with that path already there. Okay, and so then all I have to do is type, actually I'll just type dir so you can see where we are. And see, there's my Increment, Decrement, Example, exe. So I will clear the screen, CLS, and then just spell that out. Increment, Decrement, Example, and run it. And you'll notice A equals 1 and B equals 1. Okay, so prefix, that meant add 1 to A, okay, first, and then load it into B. And everything worked fine. Okay, so now let's go back and make one minor change here. Let's take the two pluses and let's just move them to the right side of A. All right, I did that with a mouse trick. You can, space them out or delete them out and add them to the other side. I just highlighted and then drug. Okay, now what this is going to do is something totally different. So let's compile this and take a look. Now this is a postfix. The other one's prefix. This is a postfix increment. And so we'll jump right back out to our command window. We will grab our increment decrement command, and notice this time A is equal to 1, B is equal to 0. Now that's kind of odd. What happened? Well, notice we said set A, since this is postfix, it set A equal to B first, and then after that operation had happened, then it incremented A. So it set A equal to B when A was still equal to 0, then it incremented A, and so that is why we ended up with B equals 0, A equals 1. So there is a real good clean example, and that should help you get your head around the difference between prefix and postfix, whether you're doing incrementing or decrementing.